Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com and today I'm here with Alex Anders. Hi Alex.
Hi.
It's great to have you on the show. Just a little introduction. Alex is an international best-selling author of romance and self-help with over 250 books published under multiple pen names. He's the host of the Bisexual Empowerment podcast and YouTube channel. And as an African-American bisexual male, Alex appears regularly in the media to speak about diversity, which is what we're talking about today, which is very exciting. And I'm really thrilled to have you on the show. So let's start with a definition, because the word diversity is kind of thrown around, like let's do diversity. But what is diversity in books and publishing as we're discussing it today?
Well, I think because the publishing industry tends to go towards authors who are white, who are straight, who are of European descent, I think for our discussion, diversity should be anything outside of that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, let's just say up front, this is a fraught topic, isn't it? I mean, in terms of, I don't like this trigger thing, as in we shouldn't talk about certain things in case they trigger people. But this is a very political hot potato, especially in this political climate. So can we just, I guess, let's just say up front that our aim, in this is to, present this in a very positive way and try to help people. How have you come up against these kind of political hot potatoes in your career talking about this?
Well, for me, it's actually, I got to say, it's a lot easier because I am a person who does not automatically fit into, the norm. So I have always been like when I was an actor, I would look around on set and I would be the only Black person on set. And I went to a school in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin is the middle of the United States. And, there are a lot of people who had never met a Black person before, and I was the first Black person they were meeting. So just in terms of life, the idea of being the diverse one just was always automatic. So it's just kind of second nature for me to deal with it. And I sometimes don't even see the differences anymore. I don't even feel when, these unusual things come up in my career, in my life. But I can tell you as a bisexual, that has, been a bit of a challenge. But, even that has been surprisingly easier and less confronting, if you will, than I would have guessed.
Well, you mentioned acting then. Just give us a little potted history of how you got into writing and publishing.
Well, I started out a long time ago wanting to be a writer and wishing I can tell stories. And I thought the way to tell those stories would be to become an actor. After coming to Los Angeles and doing it for a while, I realized that being an actor is telling other people's stories. So I tried to figure out other ways I could, tell stories. And through my career, I ended up doing things like I was a producer for Disney Channel, a promo writer producer for Disney Channel, for Toon Disney, for SoapNet, for Vivendi Universal Games for a while. And I made my living doing that for about 10 years or so. And then I started working at Disney brand marketing for Disney DVDs. And I was okay with it. It was interesting enough. But I really wanted to be in development. But in Disney, you can't really move up and down very easily. So I decided to do something radical, which was leave my job in order to be considered for like 3 development jobs that were coming up. I left my job, and then within a month, the president declared that we were in the middle of a recession, and all those jobs I wanted went away. So I decided, what have I always wanted to do with my time? That now there won't be any new jobs coming up for like another year or so. And I thought, well, I've always wanted to write a book. Let me write a book. So I wrote 1 and then wrote 3 more. And at that point, I realized, okay, well, I'm not making a lot of money here. I wonder if there's a way I can make more money. And I did some research, and I stumbled across someone by the name of Amanda Hawking, who I'm sure a lot of us, everyone listening to this podcast,
those of us oldies remember Amanda Hawking.
Yes.
I'm not sure how many new people do. Yeah.
This is true. This is a good point. So back in about 2009,
Mm.
2010, there was someone who's named Amanda Hawking, and she made big news because she signed, I think it was a $2 million deal to publish her indie books that she had been pushing digitally to a major publisher. And within that story, they were talking about how much she was making selling digitally. And I thought, what is digital? I don't know what that is. So I went, did some research on her and found out that the way she kind of honed her skills and went from zero to selling a lot digitally was on a forum called Kindle Boards at the time. So I went looking for what that was, and I found it. And this was a forum where they just talked about, like, all day long, how to sell more books. There's a bunch of independent authors. And I spent hours and hours and hours on this, researching what it is. And then I finally decided to change all my books from being print to being digital. And then I decided to just focus entirely on digital. Initially, like, I wrote 8 books initially, sold still basically nothing. And then I realized there was a bunch of people who were selling a bunch of books and they weren't talking about what they were writing. And they were writing the, sexy form of romance. In which case I said, if I ever get desperate, I mean, like, really desperate, because I'm an intellectual, I write smart books about, intelligent things. If I ever get desperate, I'll try that. And then a month or two later, I got desperate. And the first book I wrote it in a day. And I sold more in the next week with that one book than I did with my previous 8 books in the entire month. And I just switched. And from there, I just started selling more until finally, like, within 7, 8 months, I was making a living at it. And then it was just, ever since then, I've been a professional author.
And we should just say up front that that you were kind of joking with the desperate, as in romance authors, active romance authors and readers. We absolutely respect you all. and we love you. You are the basis of our industry.
The funny thing was that I've noticed that romance authors have a tendency to be on the cutting edge, like, for whatever reason.
Absolutely. Well, because they get chucked off everything. They're like, oh, sorry, we can't have sex around here. So sorry, you're not allowed on our platform. So they've always had to be ahead of everybody. I totally agree with you. So, where you were in that curve, but circling back to diversity. So are you writing, only diverse romance, so bisexual romance, African American romance, or were you writing all kinds of romance?
Actually, no. I one thing I have learned very well in my life is that there's an audience, and you play to that audience, and the audience for romance books are mostly white females. So as a Black male, I wanted to cater to the largest audience. So I wrote stories exclusively about white people. Like, I made my living writing stories about a white female, sometimes, slim-figured, sometimes curvy, mostly curvy. And it has done very well. And that was what I knew sold not only in English, but it sold in multiple languages. Mm. So that's what I did. It wasn't until, let's say, well, I started out writing originally just generic erotica. And actually, no, first I started writing male on male erotica. Mm. Then I switched to, when I realized that if I kept doing this, I would never date again, because I mostly date women. I switched to, like, a 50 Shades of Grey. And then after that, I realized, well, there's actually more money to be made in, like, just sexy romance. So I switched to werewolf romance, and I did very well by that for a while. But then I thought, okay, well, actually, there was a Kindle Unlimited switch, and things started having to be longer. So I thought, you know what? I think I'll make the switch to suspenseful romance. That's what I'll do. But it took me 7 months to learn how to do that, which meant 7 months of no income. And I, like, put all my hopes into my first book, released it, and it completely failed. And I went, oh, geez, like, either I can spend more time writing these books, or I could, like, go back to what's what's true, which I've found to be successful, or I could try something else. What should I do? And before that, I was doing my videos, which I do videos, bisexual real talk. So there were videos aimed towards bisexuals, and I was growing up an audience slowly but surely. And, I'm kind of an active guy just in terms of community building within the bisexual community. And I thought, well, if I'm doing all this stuff, why don't I also try writing bisexual romance? Let me see if there's an audience for that. And that's when I made the switch. And really, that's when I started selling the most of my career in English.
Wow. And what about the African Americans? Are you writing them yet?
Well, here's the interesting thing again. I'm from the Bahamas. So I grew up outside the United States. And each of the genres, the reason why, I work within the bisexual romance genre is that I understand the experiences that are, most associated with that. So it becomes very easy for me to write about it. Growing up in the Bahamas is different from growing up in the United States. So, and this is a tad bit of a stereotype, but not so much. I think the majority of African American grow up in with an economic level that isn't as high as the average white person in America. Whereas I grew up in the Bahamas in a 2-story house on a hill with a pool and a tennis court playing tennis with Sidney Poitier. So it wasn't exactly, the equivalent experience. So if you were to write African American romance, like what the readers are looking for are a deep dive into the African American experience, or a celebration of African American culture within the dating community, like within the dating sphere. And I don't know if I know that. Like, I can do something and I can, make the characters black, and that would certainly sell some books. But would I be able to lock into the core readership of the African American romance? So I've always kind of shied away from that, knowing that, first of all, stories with white protagonists in it sell more, and that, I have an understanding of middle-class white America better than I do, the typical African American experience.
This is so interesting because we're talking about diversity, and the assumption there is we're talking about white people writing people of different sexualities or race, and you're, black guy writing, white female. Which I think is presumably cisgender, as we call it, and, straight, which I think is brilliant. So let's talk about this in terms of the two extremes. I think there are two extremes for diversity, and you've basically covered both of them there, which is, first of all, and this is mainly the one I do, which assume people are people, and that I have enough in common with an African American woman growing up in a very poor place, but she still experiences love. She still experiences grief. People are people, whatever color, sexuality, gender, whatever. And then there's the other extreme, which you mentioned, which is the deep dive into a cultural situation where that becomes the heart of the book. And that is where the cultural appropriation issues can come. It's like, how can a white woman living... Well, I got it actually today as we're talking. Someone emailed me and said, how can I write about some of the things I do when I live in Bath, which is like this white heartland in Britain. Even though I went to school in Africa, in Malawi, in sub-Saharan Africa, I've traveled around the world. I've got, my family is multicultural. I was so offended. I was just like, but this is the thing. It's, these two extremes seem like a problem. So how can we balance writing multicultural, writing diversity, whoever we are, and not being accused of cultural appropriation?
Well, honestly, I don't think there's a way you can avoid being accused of something. People in this world are sensitive, sometimes rightfully so, sometimes not rightfully so. And if you live life fearlessly, you are going to eventually be accused of something. And it's a matter of whether or not you take it on and change because of it or not. And it's like, when should I take it on, and when should I change because of it, and when shouldn't I take it on? Or should I change for it? But the really thing is that this will just happen. This stuff will, people will just say what they say. But the question is like, when should an author for their own moral self decide, what is too much? What is, dancing on stereotypes and stuff like that? I think really the guide that an author should follow is, yes, people are just people. And the thing is, like, and I talk about my experience, like I do not have the typical African American experience, yet I'm a black man living in America, so I am by definition African American. So if you were to take a white character and just make their complexion black, that is diversity. And that is not saying that, that's not doing anything wrong. That's not just like, cheating or anything like that, because you can always find someone who is like that.
Like that, yeah.
And you're just representing someone from that class, from that whatever else, who just happens to be black.
Yeah, and I think it's the same with gender. Like people say to me, or how can I write male characters? I'm like, well, I just write them as I write a woman, and I just give them a male name. Like I probably do what you say. Like I'm like writing a thriller in India, so I give my character an Indian name, and but I don't have them like wobble their head or talk like that. So I think I sit on that side, which is I think at base people are people. But what was your other extreme there? I interrupted you.
No, the other thing is that, there's the idea of trying to do a deep dive when you don't have the experiences necessary to do it. So if you are, let's say, and again, if you write African American romance, you don't have to do the deep dive. But, it certainly helps with readership. So if you try to do it and your experiences of, let's say, the culture you're writing about is just some sort of random, well, I know him from TV or I know him from movies or from what I hear, you can rest assured that you will absolutely be writing a stereotype.
Yeah.
Because that is the way the human brain works. Like when we're a child, someone gives us a tennis ball and says, this is a ball. And then the child goes, okay, so yellow, fuzzy, and small. Those are balls. And that's not bad. That's creating a stereotype, and that's not bad. But if the parent then handed them a basketball and said, this is a ball too, and the kid said, no, that is not a ball too. All balls are yellow, fuzzy, and small.
Yeah.
Then there's a problem. So creating the stereotype isn't a problem. So if you meet like another group and you go, okay, so everyone from this group is this, this, and this, as long as when you meet someone else or you have other experiences and kind of broaden what you think of that group is, then it's not a problem. But if you don't have those multiple experiences to extend out your initial stereotype of the group, then it's a problem. And if you are writing a book and, having a lot of your book being about the culture of whatever, and you haven't expanded like that, then you can just rest assured you're writing a stereotype.
Yeah, you're getting it wrong. And then that sort of begs the question about research. So circling back to India, which is, I've been to India a number of times. I love it. In Britain, we have a lot of Indian influence. And when I was writing Destroyer of Worlds, I spent a lot of time on YouTube because the biggest thing for me there was getting the religion right. So if we mentioned race, sexuality, gender, religion is a hell of a prospect because again, you separate an African-American Muslim in an inner city with like your life in the Bahamas. Again, it's very different. So I watch YouTube videos, but in a deep sense. So like very specifically around a tiny, like what would this type of shrine look like? And then try and use those details. Also, I read a lot of, books around that. So tango dancing, I was trying to get a character on tango dancing and read a book about that. Or refugees, I was reading refugee stories written by refugees. So what are some of the other ways that you would recommend researching characters so we don't have stereotypes?
Well, I know in terms of research, the thing I do most often, and this is going to sound, kind of flat, but I go to Google Earth or Google Maps, and I choose an actual location for my sets, and I actually like walk through them so I can get a sense of what it feels like to be in that exact space. YouTube, I think, would be the best possible way because on YouTube, you can not only find, like if you're looking through religions and stuff like that, you could very easily find stuff on religion. But more than that, there are videos where they talk about, the 10 things that are 10 things are unique about dating like a Russian woman or something like that, or a Greek guy and stuff like that. So you get a sense of from someone who is from probably your culture and the things they see that are different, or from someone who left their culture and came to your culture and the things they notice that are different. So by watching like those specific types of videos, you get a sense of how a person from the culture you're writing about kind of the differences they see. And that helps you to understand the things you can add to your character that would make it a little bit more flushed out. But YouTube in all of its forms, I think, is the best possible way. Yes, you can do documentaries. Yes, you can like read stories on stuff like that. But if you want to see a person and just see how they react and just kind of see the way they interact with the world, YouTube is, I think, by far the best.
Yeah, me too. And on language, so because writing dialogue, I think this is one of the worst things that authors do, and not even on let's just do it on a country specific thing. Like I have a friend who wrote an Irish character, and then the audiobook, it was like a leprechaun. He was like, to be sure. And it was like, no, Irish people don't speak like that, or an Indian person with the kind, again, these stereotypes. Right. And I mean, you can also really be offensive. I mean, obviously there are words in the African American culture that African Americans can use with each other that you can't use if you're not an African American. It's just not acceptable. But there will be people who want to write dialogue that represents those characters. And you can see how this becomes an issue, because we want to be, sometimes you don't want to describe somebody, in exactly the right way, but you want to use some language that respects their culture. So where do you think the lines are around dialogue that might, again, be just totally cliche or wrong, morally wrong?
Well, this is, again, so many interesting, complex topics here. I grew up, as I'm sure you did, with Quentin Tarantino and Pulp Fiction. So, and Quentin Tarantino has a tendency to be comfortable with certain words to describe Black people. And he feels comfortable with that because he grew up around a lot of Black people and with a high appreciation of Blaxploitation cinema from the 70s. So that's kind of my background on it, and what I had to kind of come to terms with how people are allowed to use words if they don't exist in the culture. And I think nowadays I would say lean on being fearless. However, don't be a lazy writer. So if you're going to use the words that's going to offend somebody, ensure that you have done as much research as you possibly can so that you're not creating that stereotype, so that you've expanded your understanding of culture in such a way that you can use it in the way that it is actually used in real life. As long as you stick to those rules, I think in terms of morally, you can be okay. And as an author, it's almost your responsibility to be fearless and to kind of push a little bit. But again, don't be a lazy writer. Make sure that you've done your research and understand what you're using, because words are powerful.
Yeah, and I think the other thing just on words is, I'm 43. I'm 43, not quite yet. I'm almost 43. And what I'm finding so interesting just on gender, I mean, we've talked about sexuality, which is different to gender. And what is so interesting, I'm finding this non-binary gender thing fascinating, and this cisgender, which this word is quite new, I think, at least in my experience, transgender, intersex, but particularly I was talking to some, and the difference that younger generations have around the understanding of gender fluidity, which I love. Like, I didn't even know I had a choice to be more fluid around these things.
Who did? I didn't.
Yeah, exactly, who did? And I really love that. But what's interesting is, and again, the language. I almost feel like sometimes I love the fact that we're making up new language. I think that's the point I'm trying to get to. And yet I hear people who are my age and older using them in the wrong way. Like I heard an older relative of mine say, "Oh, I want to watch that program with the gay," and I'm like, "What is the gay?" And she's like, and she meant Graham Norton's show, which are very popular, and she didn't she didn't mean it in an offensive way. It was just the way, but it could be taken in an offensive way. So, what do you think? Around these the necessity to learn and understand the way people are using these words, and then it becomes quite silly if we get down to a sort of, I'm a cisgender African-American male Muslim, you know what I mean? How far do we go with this?
Well, I think you go as far as is necessary to accommodate your world. So, like, you don't have to know the intricacies of how a computer works to go about your life. So there's no need to really deep dive into that and to completely understand that. If your world is kind of small and isolated, then you technically don't need these words. But if your world is expanding, if you are, interacting with a lot of younger people, if you're an author and you want to tackle, try and do something that isn't just kind of straight white male, from European descent sort of thing, then it's necessary for you to go into it and understand it a little bit. But I have something for your audience, some tips, what these words mean, just kind of like the basis of it, and how authors can use it in an interesting way.
Great.
So I have a YouTube channel about bisexuality, so I deal with sexuality a lot. And I think, first of all, there's sexual orientation and sexual identity. Sexual orientation has to do with who you have fantasies about, who your behavior is with, and who you fall in love with. So it's kind of like the scientific stuff you can look at. And there's only 3. People argue there's more, but there's only 3 according to science, which is heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual. And then there's sexual identity. And identity is how you want to present yourself to the world. So, for example, there could be a person who their sexual orientation is really bisexual, but because of cultural whatever, because of, fear of reactions, they could identify as straight. So in that way, you have this kind of conflict going on. So the reason why I really now love writing bisexual characters so much, because, writing is about writing conflict. And internal conflict is key. And when I write about bisexuals, I can constantly dance with the conflict of this is how they really are, and this is how they present themselves to the world, and what conflict comes about because of that. So when dealing with the sexual identity, sexual orientation thing, those are the major differences. And for sexual identity, that's where you get straight as a sexual identity, gay as a sexual identity, bisexual, pansexual, queer,
asexual,
all these things. Asexual is different. Asexual, there is the spectrum of who you're attracted to, and then there's the scale of how strong is your sexual desire. So psychologists will put that on 2 separate scales. So it's not a sexual orientation as it is kind of a clarification, a deepening of one's sexuality. So asexual exists on a scale of how much you're attracted, and it goes from hypersexual to asexual. So that's slightly something different. In terms of trans and non-binary and stuff like that, those are all words that exist in a spectrum of, or 2 different categories, which is sex and gender. Sex is all about the biology. It's about what genitals you were born with, and what chemicals are being released in your body at particular ages and stuff like that. It's all about sex. And now there's officially 2, but now expanding on there's like a third, which is currently more like an other, because there's just so many variations on it. So it's male, female, and currently other, and other people might use different words. But then there's gender, and gender is how do you feel? Do you feel whatever your individual society or your individual culture describes as male? Describes as female. And again, with the identities, there are different identities within that. So there's male, there's female, there's I feel trans. Intersex is more of closer on the lines of sex, because intersex has to do with what your biology is, and it not kind of completely conforming to all things male, all things female. So you might, your genitals might not be completely clear in terms of what they are. But in terms of writing about someone within that sphere, creating a conflict between what their sex is and how they feel is another thing you can kind of tap into to just get the interesting stuff about diversity and exploring past, the straight world, and kind of clear of what the differences are between all of them.
Yeah, and that's I find it so interesting. I mean, I did gender studies within psychology when I studied psychology, and I think it is so interesting, as you say. And like I write a female action hero who is, he's kind of presenting as male in so many ways, because she's basically James Bond, but a female James Bond, because in the white action hero it's usually a man, so
Right.
This can go on so many levels, and I still I think because I write diverse characters all the time, and I still kind of come back to, at the end of the day, that person, whatever their external and internal things, will still love, will still grieve, will still look for a home, unless they're a psychopath. And the personality, I mean, there's a lot of books about psychopaths, so that's fine. But let's just talk. I just wanted to mention The Guardian on the 31st of December 2017 said that diversity in publishing is a trend for 2018, which I thought was really interesting. And you had said it is a smart business decision for authors to include diverse characters. Now, I think it's a bit sad that we have to say that it's a trend in publishing, because it should be just part of publishing. But do you think that this push, and obviously we've got a lot of movements that are going on right now in our this point in history that are trying to bring more diversity, do you think that this will stop being an issue, or how much will this become part of the industry, or will it always feel like something we have to talk about?
No, I think things are changing. I think things are always changing and always getting better. But I think that article had a point to what they were saying, but for a reason. I think there's a very specific reason why 2018 is and not 2017 or 2016. 3 reasons. First one being that the generations are changing. The experiences of people growing up it's just expanding. So we are of the same generation. There is a generation behind us, the millennials, and I think the millennials grew up with race, like diversity and race being standard because of rap music. It just became everywhere because TV shows were beginning to be more diverse when they were growing up. Because of, I guess, MTV is less now, but still back when millennials were there, it's still kind of a big thing. And because of all these things, the millennials have grown up with, diversity is just kind of expected. That's just what it is. And now they've started making content for themselves, and it reflects that. And then the generation behind them, which is Generation Z, they're growing up with sexual diversity the same way millennials grew up with racial diversity. So if you want to write books that these readers can relate to, though, you have to start thinking about diversity. And you'll always sell books if you don't include diversity. But the stickiness factor of those generations, like, for example, I am a lover of an author whose name is B.V. Larson. He writes sci-fi, and I read a lot of sci-fi authors. But the first time I read one of his books, the first chapter, aliens come to Earth. Sadly, they kill his children, grab him, put him on the space, and then he has to battle to survive. And the person that he had to battle was a Latina woman. And he fights her off and wins, and then she gets thrown off the spaceship. But he tells the spaceship to grab her and help her and repair her. And they become romantic interests. And it's like, as when you're not white and you're reading books, when you see a character, a main character that is anything other than white, you have a tendency just to go, "What?" So, so I saw this and I kind of went, "Wait, what just happened here?"
Mm.
And from that point forward, like his best friend was black, and all these other racial diverse groups were added to the story. And as a non-white reader, you kind of just go, "Oh, I like this. I really like this."
Mm.
So if you want that stickiness, and I've read about 13 or 15 of his books, in part because I can like relate to stuff. If you want that stickiness with your readership, then you probably should try and make the worlds better reflect the world of the upcoming generations, because those are the new readers.
Mm.
That's one big thing. But I think also, like specifically 2018 versus 2017-16, this is a kind of a broader historical thing. And I'm going to use American history since it's what I'm most familiar with. So there was a Civil War in the United States, which was the war against the North against the South, and it was a war over slavery. Lincoln fought the war, freed the slaves. And right after that happened, there was a group created called the Ku Klux Klan. It's an American group. It's like a white supremacist group in the United States.
I would hope that most people have heard of that.
I would hope too. But I'm sure your viewers are from all over the world. So there's the Ku Klux Klan, and they existed for a number of decades until the rest of society came down and squashed them and quieted them, and they went away for a while. So then that remained for another couple of decades until about 1940s, where there was a lot of Italian immigration into the United States, and them plus the Jews plus the blacks caused the Ku Klux Klan to decide they had to have a second wave. And then they did. And that lasted for a slightly shorter time, and then the rest of society came down and squashed that. And they remained quiet again until the 1960s, when there was the civil rights movement going on. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and then there was a third wave of the Ku Klux Klan. And again, society came together and kind of squashed them down. And what happened? What did we just come out of in 2016? It was the first African-American president in the history of America. And what happened right afterwards? Well, we had our first president who openly said derogatory things about other races, and had made his career off of saying that the first black president wasn't born here. And then we had Charlottesville, where the people of the Ku Klux Klan, the white supremacist group, once again had they felt empowered, and they again came to the forefront. So what happened throughout all of history? Society has come together again to silence that voice. And I think that with everyone, readers tend to be a little bit more liberal, simply because when you read, you find out about other people's worlds. So readers see those things, like in Charlottesville, there was that rally in Charlottesville, and go, "That's really icky." And if you watch a TV show that just has all white people on it, or just read a books that just have nothing but white culture, it's kind of like, "That's icky." Oh, and that TV show I'm watching kind of reflects the philosophy of that ickiness over there. And this book I read is just nothing but that. Maybe I should look for something a little bit more broader. And because of that kind of historical trend, people nowadays have a tendency to look for things that are slightly more diverse and does not reflect the ickiness of what's going on in society today. So because of that trend, I think it is, for 2018, a good idea to present things that make readers feel good for reading it, as opposed to having it reflect the attitude of that we don't want it in society.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I don't know if this was Martin Luther King, but that the arc of the moral universe tends towards the good. I think that was that Martin Luther King, I think.
I think so. It's long and bends towards justice.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, like it's all good, but we're moving towards the good. And I was thinking about that around Netflix, because what's so interesting around Netflix and the streaming media and ebooks, the ease of finding ebooks, is that readers have a chance to actually seek out these more diverse, different things that they want to watch or read, and they can find them, and they're being produced now. Whereas it was that the publishing industry, which certainly in Britain, they've had reports on it, is very, very white, straight dominated, university educated, but now because of self-publishing, people can publish the books they want. I mean, Wattpad is so interesting. Wattpad, we're talking about, young Muslim women writing stories about, love stories, what that means within a Muslim culture, which is so different to what you or I would be used to.
Can't even imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that is absolutely fascinating. So I love this. I think this is such an interesting angle. And in a way it shouldn't be, but I think we all have to be responsible for saying, yes, let's try and just, instead of just instinctively picking a character just like us, is to try and think a bit deeper about who that character could be, and as you say, use that for conflict. Within my own family, we have several mixed race marriages across, racial and religious diversity, just within my siblings. And there is, of course, when you come from different cultures, there are going to be conflicts, but yet love is there. So I think this is so important.
And I don't even think, yes, it's absolutely important, and morally speaking, it's probably something you should be thinking about as an author. But just looking at it from an author perspective, the fun of writing is coming up with conflicts and kind of resolving those conflicts and diving into the experiences of, interacting with different races and different sexual orientations and stuff like that. It's like a gold mine. In the United States, I've been noticing just so many more bisexual characters ending up on television shows. And honestly, I don't think it's because TV writers are saying, hey, this is something different, whatever else. I think it's generally because when a person really stops and thinks about it, like writing about bisexuality or a bisexual character, how much more interesting is it that character can fall in love with that person, which is, which, let's say, the opposite gender, which is pretty standard and stuff like that. But then you can have that same character later on fall for that one over there. There's just so much you can explore, so much you can do with it. It just becomes so much more of an option to a person as a writer. And I think more and more writers are starting to realize that, and hence making more and more characters bisexual, because it just opens up this whole new world of what you can explore and stuff that people haven't seen before.
Yeah, fantastic. Right. So where can people find you and your books and your YouTube channel and everything you do online?
You can go to one place, alexandersbooks.com. There I have all of my books listed. I also have all my social media, so you can find my YouTube channel and you can find all that stuff there.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time, Alex. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad you invited me, and I appreciate it so much.